Tired of feeling like you're always behind? That no matter what you achieve, there's always someone else doing it better, faster, or shinier? You're not alone, and you're definitely not broken. Here's something you probably won't know right away. Many of the self-critical habits you carry now didn't start in your adulthood. They go way back. Way, way back. Long before the first test score or photo filter. Your sense of worth began forming in the softest corners of childhood, molded quietly by comparison, praise, punishment, and the smallest of glances. You are not defined by your productivity, popularity, or the speed at which you figure it all out. You are shaped by your patterns, yes, but also by your ability to interrupt those patterns. That's where self-compassion steps in. Not as a fluffy feel-good concept, but as a grounded, research-backed practice. One that helps you breathe again when the race gets too loud. One that allows you to sit with yourself, as you are, and whisper, "You're allowed to be here." Right now, you lie in the quiet hum of your room. Maybe your phone is dimmed beside you. Maybe your thoughts are still running circles around someone else's highlight reel. Maybe not. Maybe tonight, you're just tired. Here's your reality check: self-compassion isn't a luxury. It's a life skill. And while it's often overshadowed by louder, shinier buzzwords, grit, hustle, confidence, it's actually the glue that holds all of it together when things fall apart. Before you settle in, feel free to like the video if it brought you a little peace, and if you'd like to join us again, we'd love to have you back. Subscribe when you're ready. No pressure, just rest. Share something if you feel like it. Let's slowly drift into tonight's quiet moments together. Your earliest experiences with comparison probably felt harmless. Maybe it started in a classroom. A test. A line of kids running laps around the gym. Someone got a gold star and someone else didn't. Maybe you were the star. Maybe you weren't. But something settled in. Being better meant being valued. Being average meant being invisible. And being worse? Well, let's not even go there. Psychologists have long studied the development of self-concept in early childhood. One pivotal theory, social comparison theory, introduced by Leon Festinger in the 1950s, proposes that you naturally evaluate your own worth by comparing yourself to others. It's human. It's automatic. It's how you figure out who you are. But here's the catch: that mechanism doesn't evolve much with age. The comparisons just get fancier. Instead of who ran the fastest lap, it's now who bought a house first, who looks best at 40, who already found their passion. The same measuring stick, dressed up in adulthood's clothes. An odd but true fact: toddlers show signs of social comparison as early as 18 months. They'll mimic the behavior of higher status individuals, even in puppet shows. It's in the wiring. The instinct to fit in. To belong. To be seen as enough. But there remains considerable disagreement about whether comparison always leads to self-harm. Some researchers argue that upward comparison, looking at people above you, can motivate you. Push you toward growth. Others say it leads to a spiral of inadequacy and self-criticism. The outcome seems to depend not on what you compare, but how you interpret the gap. Maybe you remember feeling that gap early on. Someone else always seemed more graceful, more liked, more certain. Maybe it was a sibling. A friend. A classmate who just always seemed to win. It sneaks in quietly, that sense that you're being graded. Even now, as an adult, it's hard to shake. You might not even realize how often you're scanning the room, real or virtual, for signs that you measure up. And when you don't just feel sad. You feel defective. That's what's so sneaky about comparison. It doesn't just tell you where you are. It whispers something about who you are. Your nervous system remembers. Your body stores those early evaluation cues in the form of tension, fidgeting, gut flutters. Your brain might know you're worthy, but your posture, your breath, your clenched jaw, they still echo the old story: be better, or be forgotten. Now, a weird little bonus from the research front. In one study, participants who were told they might be evaluated just the possibility of judgment, began showing increased cortisol levels, even if no one actually judged them. Your body doesn't wait for the verdict. It reacts to the threat of being ranked. Your stress response isn't picky. It just wants to protect you. So where does that leave you now? Maybe lying in bed, wondering why your thoughts feel like a race you never signed up for. Wondering why rest feels like laziness. Why someone else's glow-up video makes you feel like a failure. It's not your fault. That sense of constant measurement was planted long before you could defend yourself from it. But here's where your power begins. You can start changing the way you respond to that impulse. You can start noticing when the comparison train starts up again, and gently choose not to ride it all the way to self-loathing station. And it is a choice. A quiet, repeated, self-directed choice. Not to never compare. That's impossible. But to soften the impact. To replace shame with curiosity. Instead of, why am I not like them, try, what about their life is waking something up in me? You don't have to win the race. You don't even have to keep pace. You just have to recognize when you're sprinting out of fear, and choose, instead, to walk with yourself a little more kindly. That's where we begin tonight. In that slow, steady shift from harshness to softness. From judgment to presence. And that shift in energy leads us into something else. Because now you're not just comparing test scores or field day ribbons. Now you're comparing curated lives. Filtered lives. Lives that sparkle in little squares in short-form videos, lit with ring lights and polished by algorithms. And even though you know it's edited, staged, and branded, your nervous system still buys it. Social media has turned comparison into a 24/7 buffet. And the thing about buffets? You rarely walk away feeling good about yourself. You wake up, reach for your phone, and without realizing it, you've just opened the door to hundreds, maybe thousands, of other people's victories. Morning routines. Book deals. Up photos. Engagement rings. Perfect lighting. Perfect angles. Perfect captions. You scroll, and slowly, you shrink. Here's something you might find surprising. Researchers have found that people tend to compare themselves more negatively when looking at the curated images of acquaintances, not celebrities. Not strangers. Not even influencers. But people you know just enough to believe they're somehow living your life, but better. And the weird twist? Your brain often registers their wins as evidence of your own shortcomings. That's what psychologist Sherry Tickle refers to as the tyranny of the positive self-presentation. You don't just see others thriving, you see them thriving without the messy middle. And that absence of struggle creates a distorted mirror. One where you always come up short. One 2020 study found that the more time users spent on social media, particularly Instagram, the more likely they were to report depressive symptoms due to upward social comparison. And it wasn't just the content. It was the frequency of exposure. Tiny drops of inadequacy, day after day. It adds up. Like erosion. Quiet, slow, inevitable erosion. Now here's a little surprise for you. Early in Facebook's development, the like button was meant to be a simple positive affirmation. But studies later showed that when someone receives fewer likes than expected, it lights up the brain's pain centers, specifically, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. That's the same area activated when you experience physical pain. So yes, your brain quite literally interprets low engagement as rejection. Fun, right? A long-standing controversy surrounds whether it's the platforms themselves causing the mental health dip, or the way we individually interact with them. Some scholars argue that social media simply magnifies pre-existing self-esteem patterns. Others say the very design of these platforms exploits our evolutionary desire for social ranking and tribal belonging. Either way, your self-concept ends up in the crossfire. You probably already know that you're seeing the highlight reel, not the behind the scenes. But knowing that doesn't protect you emotionally. Not really. Because your nervous system isn't operating with critical thinking. It's reacting in milliseconds. Reacting to jawlines and houses and wedding montages. Reacting to abs and yachts and people who seem to wake up spiritually aligned every morning at 5 a.m. And here's the kicker, even your own social media isn't a full picture of you. You might post a selfie on a good hair day or a vacation throwback, and even though you know you cried in the car last night, you start to compare yourself to yourself. Your past self. Your filtered self. Your perceived to be more put together self. And suddenly, you're not just measuring yourself against others. You're measuring yourself against your own myth. It's exhausting. What would it be like to interrupt that cycle? Not necessarily by deleting all your apps and moving to a yurt, although, sure, yurt life has its appeal, but by softening the stakes. What if you could look at someone's glow-up video and say, good for them, without adding, and what's wrong with me? That's the self-compassion muscle starting to twitch. The tiny, trembly beginning of a new pattern. Here's where it gets interesting. Self-compassion isn't just about replacing negative thoughts with affirmations. It's not about slapping on a "you got this" sticker over a cracked self-esteem. According to psychologist Kristin Neff, self-compassion involves 3 essential elements: mindfulness, common humanity, and self-kindness. Mindfulness means noticing your pain without exaggerating or minimizing it. Common humanity means remembering you're not the only one hurting, doubting, or feeling not enough. And self-kindness means speaking to yourself the way you would a dear friend. Not with empty flattery. With gentleness. With honesty. With patience. So next time your finger hovers over a scrolling feed and you feel that tight pang of, I'm not doing enough, try catching the story. Pause. Notice. Ah. Comparison is here. No shame. No panic. Just recognition. You're not broken for comparing. You're human. And while we're at it, a quirky side note, some researchers suggest that comparing downward, meaning, to someone worse off than you, can temporarily boost self-esteem. But here's the twist, it often leaves you feeling guilty or hollow. That's because it soothes your status anxiety but doesn't truly affirm your self-worth. What affirms your self-worth? Real connection. With yourself. With others who aren't trying to outshine or outperform. With people who let you be messy. Incomplete. Growing. You might not feel like logging off completely. That's okay. Social media isn't inherently evil, it's a tool. But like all tools, it has to be wielded with care. If you know the blade is sharp, you learn to handle it gently. You put up guards. You give yourself permission to step away when it cuts too deep. Tonight, maybe you let your phone rest on the nightstand without checking it just one more time. Maybe not. Maybe you scroll a little more. No shame either way. Just awareness. Just that whisper of gentleness that says, you don't have to prove anything tonight. That feeling of permission, however faint, is the doorway to something quieter. Something softer. And that quiet leads us, next, to where all this pressure begins to build. In the grind. The hustle. The never stop, keep climbing, do more culture that leaves you breathless even when you're standing still. You don't just compare who you are. You compare what you've done. How fast you've done it. How visibly successful it looks from the outside. In the age of hustle, being busy becomes a badge. Overwork becomes overvalued. And somewhere along the way, your worth gets tangled up in your output. Think about it. How many times have you answered, "How are you?" with "busy"? As if that were a sign of importance. And how many moments have you punished yourself for needing rest, or for falling behind on goals that weren't even yours to begin with? You didn't invent this. It's in the air. The grind mindset is everywhere, from inspirational Instagram quotes yelling, "No excuses," to productivity YouTubers timing their morning routines to the second. And while ambition can be beautiful, it turns corrosive when it becomes a metric of value instead of a tool for expression. You might find this surprising. A 2016 Harvard Business School study showed that people increasingly associate hard work with higher moral worth. Not results. Not integrity. Just effort. The more exhausted you look, the more deserving you're perceived to be. No wonder burnout gets romanticized. A long-standing controversy surrounds whether high achievers thrive because of their drive, or in spite of it. Some researchers argue that perfectionism fuels success. Others insist that it creates anxiety, paralysis, and eventual collapse. The nuance? It may work temporarily. But in the long run, it depletes emotional reserves and strains identity. When your self-image hinges on performance, any failure, even a small one, feels existential. That's where self-compassion comes in. And no, it's not slacking off or making excuses. It's the very thing that keeps you from boiling alive in your own pressure cooker. Dr. Kristen Neff, yes, her again, she's everywhere for a reason, has shown in multiple studies that people who practice self-compassion are actually more resilient, not less. They bounce back from failure faster. They take greater responsibility for mistakes, because they're not crushed by them. They set healthier goals, because they're not trying to prove their existence through gold stars. Here's a fun little twist. When researchers asked participants to recall a personal failure, those who practiced self-compassion were less likely to ruminate, and more likely to try again. In contrast, self-critical participants didn't just stew, they quit. It's a quiet paradox. You do better when you stop trying to prove your worth through doing better. Of course, that doesn't mean ambition disappears. It just gets untangled from shame. You can still want things. Big things. Bold, juicy, scary goals. But those desires no longer ride shotgun with the fear that you're nothing without them. Think of self-compassion as a landing pad. A place you can fall and bounce, not break. A way to hold the hustle without letting it hold you. And yes, this is hard. Because the messages are loud. Everywhere you turn, someone's crushing it. Launching. Scaling. Winning. And you? You're maybe just keeping it together. Feeding yourself. Paying your bills. Dealing with your stuff. That should count too. But it rarely does. Just a quirky detail. In Japan, the concept of karoshi refers to death from overwork. It's recognized by the government. That's how deeply work addiction is embedded in modern cultures. The warning signs are not subtle. But still, we praise the overextended and quietly shame the restful. Even your hobbies have started to feel like side hustles. Painting becomes an Etsy shop. Writing becomes a Substack. Lifting weights becomes a fitness brand. It's exhausting. You can't just be anymore. You have to monetize your being. And here's the reality, your value does not live in your productivity. You are not a spreadsheet. You are not a brand. You are not a machine. You are a human being who needs rest, laughter, breath, and meaning. The issue has sparked significant intellectual debate in positive psychology. Should success be defined by personal achievement or life satisfaction? Should flow states be used to boost performance or deepen presence? Are we chasing goals that belong to us, or to someone else's vision of success? Maybe tonight, you start asking different questions. Not, how can I optimize my day, but, what would make today feel like mine? And if you're not sure what you want anymore, that's okay too. The hustle fog blurs things. Clarity returns slowly, like the sound of birds after a storm. What if your self-worth didn't need a performance review? What if your rest was sacred, not shameful? What if you could let go of the grind, not because you gave up, but because you're finally waking up? That shift doesn't come with fanfare. It comes in small choices. A few deep breaths. A boundary set. A deadline declined. A nap unapologetically taken. These are acts of rebellion in a world that tells you to prove your value every second. So tonight, maybe you let your shoulders drop just a little. Maybe you forgive yourself for the to-do list you didn't finish. Maybe you allow yourself to exist without earning it. That soft sigh of relief you just felt? That's your nervous system saying, thank you. And that quiet exhale brings us closer to the next layer of this journey. That constant pressure to achieve isn't just outside of you, it's inside your head, in a voice that sounds suspiciously like your own, but sharper, colder, and less forgiving. You know the one. That relentless inner narrator who picks apart everything you do. The one who rolls their eyes when you mess up. The one who tells you, you should have known better, or you're falling behind, or everyone else has it together, what's your excuse? This, dear overthinker, is the inner critic. And it has a microphone. Not just any microphone. A front row center stage, noise cancelling, Dolby Digital surround sound mic that echoes through your mind at the worst possible moments. Psychologists call it negative self-talk. But let's be real, it's more like self-bullying in a lab coat. And while it might sound like it's trying to keep you in line, it's actually exhausting you. Undermining you. Making you question your own worth, even when there's no good reason to. According to clinical psychologist Paul Gilbert, this inner critic often develops in response to early life experiences, particularly environments where love or approval was conditional. If praise came only when you were good, smart, or successful, then part of you learned to crack the whip before anyone else could. Beat them to the judgment. Stay safe. But that voice? It's stuck in a time loop. It thinks it's helping. It thinks harshness equals growth. What it doesn't know is that softness is stronger. Softer doesn't mean weaker. Softer means you're not tearing yourself down before you even begin. Something unexpected you'll want to know. Research published in the Journal of Personality shows that people who engage in regular self-criticism are less motivated, not more. The assumption that being hard on yourself makes you work harder turns out to be mostly false. Self-critics procrastinate more. They fear failure more. And they experience lower emotional resilience when things go wrong. But a long-standing controversy surrounds whether the inner critic is always harmful. Some psychologists argue that mild self-monitoring helps us grow. That without any form of internal feedback, we'd stagnate. Others say that most self-criticism crosses the line into self-sabotage, and that the true driver of growth is curiosity, not cruelty. So how do you deal with that voice? Not by trying to erase it. That never works. You can't evict your inner critic. But you can learn to turn the volume down. You can give the mic to someone else inside you, the gentler, wiser part. The one who doesn't expect perfection, but celebrates progress. And yes, that part does exist in you. Even if it's been quiet for a while. Here's a weird little bonus. In compassion-focused therapy, clients are sometimes asked to personify their inner critic. Give it a name. A face. A weird outfit. Why? Because it creates distance. When you imagine your inner critic as a cranky old judge in a powdered wig, or a snarky squirrel wearing a tiny robe, it loses power. It becomes less of a truth teller and more of a character. Something you can dialogue with, not obey. Let's try it now. Think of that voice in your head that just won't let you rest. The one that points out what you didn't do today. What name would you give it? What ridiculous outfit could it wear? A glittery cape? Crocs and a monocle? Get creative. The sillier, the better. This isn't about mocking yourself. It's about disrupting the automatic authority that voice holds. Once it becomes separate, you can challenge it. You can say, "Thanks for your input, Brenda in the leopard print blazer, but I'm choosing kindness tonight." You're not crazy for having that voice. We all have it. But you're not obligated to believe everything it says. In fact, the more you practice self-compassion, the more you start to hear another voice. One that says things like, "You're learning. You showed up today. That counts. It's okay to not have the answers right now." That voice? It's not passive. It's protective. It's the one that lets you rest so you can come back stronger. It's the one that lets you fail without crumbling. It's the one that sees your effort, not just your outcome. Here's something else interesting. Neuroscientists have found that self-reassurance activates different areas of the brain than self-criticism. When you're hard on yourself, regions associated with threat and punishment light up. But when you practice self-compassion, it engages the affiliative system, linked to safety, bonding, and emotional regulation. Basically, being nice to yourself literally calms your nervous system. It's not just feel-good fluff. It's biology. And no, you don't have to go full Stuart Smalley in the mirror with, "I'm good enough, I'm smart enough" mantras. Start with neutral statements. This is hard, and I'm doing my best. Or, it makes sense that I feel this way. These are gentle bridges from the critic to the kind observer. Now, a quirky side note for your dreams tonight. In Tibetan Buddhist tradition, there's a practice called lojong, which includes slogans to cultivate compassion. One of them is, be grateful to everyone. Even your inner critic. Why? Because that voice is trying, clumsily, to protect you. To keep you from embarrassment or rejection. It's just using outdated tools. And you? You're learning to upgrade the toolkit. So tonight, if the voice in your head starts its usual late-night monologue, maybe you don't try to shut it down. Maybe you just listen, and gently disagree. You're allowed to say, "I hear you, but I choose kindness instead." That simple act of choosing changes everything. It's how you start to rewire the soundtrack of your life. And with that, we drift gently toward the science behind why this works so powerfully. Self-compassion isn't just a nice idea, it's a full-body recalibration. It's not all mantras and bath bombs, though hey, never knock a good soak. It's a shift in how your brain, heart, and nervous system process failure, stress, and even joy. Let's start with this. When you treat yourself kindly in moments of pain, your brain doesn't just feel better, it functions better. That's right. Compassion changes the neural game. In mainstream psychology, a growing body of research shows that self-compassion is strongly associated with reduced anxiety, lower levels of depression, and improved emotional resilience. And it's not because life gets easier. It's because your inner world becomes a softer, safer place to land when it gets hard. You might not realize this, but your body is constantly scanning for cues of safety or threat, what neuroscientist Stephen Porges calls neuroception. It's like your subconscious radar. When you're self-critical, your body registers that as internal threat. It tightens up. Adrenaline kicks in. You enter a stress response against yourself. Here's where it gets amazing. Self-compassion signals safety. It activates your parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest zone. Your heart rate slows. Your breathing deepens. Your muscles unclench. Your body goes, "Oh, we're okay. We're not under attack. We can stay." In fact, studies using fMRI scans have shown that when people practice self-compassion, regions like the insula and anterior cingulate cortex, both linked to empathy and emotional regulation, light up. It's like turning on your internal comfort lamp. You might find this interesting. One particular hormone gets a noticeable boost when you treat yourself with kindness, oxytocin. Yep, the cuddle hormone. The same one released during hugs, eye contact, and those sappy end-of-the-movie reunions. When you soothe yourself, your brain gives you a biochemical "atta-girl" or "atta-dude." You literally feel warmer and more connected to yourself. And that connection matters. Because here's the hard truth: you can't outsource self-worth. People can love you, support you, praise you, but if you're brutal inside your own mind, none of it sticks. It's like pouring water into a cracked glass. You need an internal container that holds kindness. There remains considerable disagreement among researchers about how much of self-compassion is learned versus innate. Some argue that it's a personality trait, something you're born with. Others believe it's a skill anyone can practice and develop. The reality is likely somewhere in the middle. But what matters for you tonight? You can absolutely build more of it. Like a muscle. And muscles get stronger with reps. Let's talk about those reps, because self-compassion isn't just about crisis management. It's not only for the breakdowns and bad days. It's an everyday practice. A tone of voice. A posture. A pause. Imagine this: you forget to reply to a text. Instead of, "Ugh, I'm the worst," try, "I've been overwhelmed." Makes sense, I missed that. One's a dagger. The other's a hand on your back. You spill your coffee. Idiot, your mind whispers. But you notice it. You take a breath. It's okay, just a spill. That pause? That noticing? That's the moment of transformation. Here's something fun and slightly offbeat. In one study, researchers trained participants to say compassionate phrases to themselves while looking in a mirror. At first, people cringed. Some even laughed. But by week 3, they reported lower levels of self-judgment and higher levels of life satisfaction. It didn't even matter if they believed the words at first. The repetition rewired the narrative. That's the secret sauce. You don't have to feel full of love for yourself all the time. That's a myth. A fantasy. What you can do is consistently interrupt the cruelty. Insert care. Even when it feels fake. Even when it's clumsy. Over time, you begin to believe it, not because it's fluffy, but because it's been proven by your own behavior. Now, a quirky side note, there's a traditional Hawaiian practice called Ho'oponopono, a ritual of forgiveness and reconciliation. Part of it involves repeating 4 phrases to yourself or others. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. Sounds simple. But people have used it for decades to soften self-directed anger and grief. You don't need to adopt the whole ritual. But consider the rhythm. The sentiment. Could you try whispering those 4 phrases to yourself when your mind turns sharp? Because that's the turning point, right? Not when everything goes well, but when you mess up, and you choose gentleness anyway. Not as an excuse. As a revolution. And while the research is still catching up, some scientists are exploring the epigenetic effects of self-compassion. Meaning? Your kindness toward yourself might influence how your genes express over time. Early findings suggest that stress-reducing behaviors, including compassionate self-talk, can literally alter immune function and inflammation responses. Wild, right? But here's the thing, self-compassion doesn't mean giving up. It doesn't mean settling. It means rooting your growth in something sturdier than fear. You're not coddling yourself. You're giving yourself the emotional foundation to take risks, show up, and try again. It's like building a home. Harsh self-talk puts you on sand. Self-compassion pours the concrete. So tonight, you might try it. A phrase. A breath. A small act of care. Not because you deserve it after doing enough. But because you're already enough, even when you do nothing. Let that land. You don't have to earn your way into your own tenderness. And from that steadier ground, we can now peel back another layer of this conversation. Let's be honest, there's a certain kind of pressure that sneaks into even the most well-meaning wellness advice. You know the one. The shiny Instagram posts that say, love yourself unconditionally, while showing someone doing yoga on a cliffside at sunrise with perfect skin and no hint of sleep deprivation. It's a vibe, sure, but also kind of a trap. Because self-love has been turned into a performance. A product. Something to be flaunted, graded, and consumed. It's no longer enough to just be okay with yourself. You have to radiate confidence and glow with alignment 24/7, or else, what? You're failing at healing? Let's clear something up right now. Self-compassion isn't about reaching a mystical level of inner peace where you never doubt yourself again. It's not about loving everything about yourself all the time. Sometimes you're just tired. Cranky. Unglamorous. Messy. And that's still valid. You don't have to become your own guru. Here's a twist you may not expect. In some studies, people who reported higher levels of self-acceptance, not necessarily self-love, were actually more emotionally stable and less prone to anxiety. The key isn't always in being your biggest fan. Sometimes it's in being your most consistent ally. That's an important difference. One says, I like myself today. The other says, I'll be here for myself, no matter how I feel today. Because here's a real-life moment for you. Sometimes you look in the mirror and feel kind of meh. And you still deserve kindness. Sometimes your to-do list goes untouched. And you still deserve rest. Sometimes your growth looks more like standing still. And yes, you still count. Just a quirky detail from the psychological archives. In one fringe but fascinating study, researchers examined whether forcing positive affirmations, "I am lovable," helped boost self-esteem. The result? It only worked for people who already had high self-worth. For those who didn't, it actually made them feel worse. Why? Because the brain rejected what it couldn't believe. The mental whiplash of repeating things that feel untrue can backfire. So if you've ever felt weird saying, "I love myself," while your inner monologue screaming, "No, you don't, you're not alone. And you're not broken." A long-standing controversy surrounds whether affirmations should focus on what you are or how you act. Some psychologists argue that identity-based affirmations anchor you more deeply. Others say behavior-based affirmations are more believable and sustainable, like, "I'm learning to treat myself with kindness," versus, "I always love myself no matter what." Here's the part where we gently sidestep the glittery pressure of perfect healing. You don't have to be Zen. You don't have to float through life on a self-care cloud. You're allowed to be inconsistent, reactive, moody, and still deeply, wildly worthy of compassion. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is say, "Wow, I was kind of a mess today, and that's okay. I'll show up again tomorrow." There's a freedom in admitting that. A deep sigh of relief. You're not a project to be fixed. You're not a brand. You're not an algorithm waiting for the right inputs to finally unlock self-worth. You're a person. With rhythms. With seasons. With unfiltered mornings and soft night stumbles. Here's a soft surprise from mindfulness traditions. In metta, loving kindness, meditation, practitioners often start not with themselves, but with a stranger, or even someone neutral. Why? Because extending love inward can be too hard at first. But by slowly working up to yourself, the practice builds capacity. You don't have to start with, "I love me." You can start with, "I'm willing to try." Or, "May I be gentle with myself." That counts. That matters. So if all those self-love quotes have ever made you feel worse, not better, just know, you're not the only one side-eyeing the glitter storm. Self-love, as sold on mugs and tote bags, often skips the part where you struggle to love yourself. But that part is the most human of all. You're not failing at healing just because you still have rough days. That is healing. Showing up to yourself anyway. Sitting with the hard stuff without needing to polish it. And honestly, most of your transformation will not be aesthetic. It won't make for great content. It happens in pajamas. In cluttered kitchens. In late night overthinking followed by one moment, just one, of gentleness. Maybe that moment is right now. Maybe you're lying here, exhausted from trying to get it all right. Maybe there's still a to-do list in your head. A regret. A half-finished apology. And maybe none of it disqualifies you from peace. That's the magic of this practice. You can be a mess and still be healing. You can be unsure and still be enough. You can be skeptical and still try. Self-compassion isn't a finish line. It's a direction. A way of walking with yourself instead of running away. And when you finally accept that love doesn't have to look perfect, it just has to be present, you begin to open a little more space inside. That space, soft and quiet, makes room for our next reflection. Compassion is not a hall pass. It's not letting yourself off the hook. It's not turning your alarm off forever or shrugging at your responsibilities with a half-hearted meh. One of the most misunderstood parts of self-compassion is this idea that it's somehow the opposite of ambition, progress, or accountability. Let's set the record straight. Compassion isn't complacency. In fact, it's the opposite. When you treat yourself with care, you create the inner safety needed to grow more bravely, not less. Think about it. When have you grown the most in life? Probably not when you were panicked, shamed, or terrified of failure. Probably not when you were berating yourself or chasing someone else's approval. More likely, your biggest turning points came after someone, maybe even just a voice inside, said, "It's okay to be where you are. Let's take the next step together." The research backs this up. A study in motivation and emotion found that people who practiced self-compassion after failure were more likely to take action, correct their mistakes, and improve future performance than those who relied on self-esteem alone. Why? Because self-compassion fosters emotional stability and personal responsibility, without the drama. Here's something that might surprise you: people who are kind to themselves tend to have higher intrinsic motivation. That's the kind of motivation that comes from within, not from trophies, likes, or gold stars. It's the type of drive that feels aligned, meaningful, and, dare we say, even enjoyable. Self-critical folks, on the other hand, are often motivated by fear of failure, rejection, or not being enough. An odd but true fact: researchers have studied self-compassion in Olympic athletes. And guess what? The most consistent performers weren't the ones who were relentlessly self-critical. They were the ones who practiced self-forgiveness after a bad performance. They didn't spiral. They recalibrated. Because they trusted themselves to recover. That leads us to a big question: what's the difference between holding yourself accountable and beating yourself up? It's tone. It's intention. Accountability says, "That didn't go as planned. What can I learn?" Shame says, "That didn't go as planned, so clearly I'm garbage." One helps you grow. The other paralyzes you. There's a phrase from acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, that fits here: you can't hate yourself into change. Harshness might create short-term obedience, but it rarely leads to sustainable transformation. Compassion, on the other hand, gives you enough safety to experiment, to stumble, and to keep going. The issue has sparked significant intellectual debate: is compassion a necessary ingredient for achievement, or merely a supportive accessory? Some argue that too much gentleness makes you soft. But newer frameworks, especially those in trauma-informed psychology, suggest the opposite. That healing and progress both require psychological safety. And what's safer than being treated with kindness by your own mind? Imagine this: you miss a deadline. The inner critic wants to yell. But instead, you pause. You say, "Wow, I'm overwhelmed. No wonder I missed that." Then you ask, "What do I need to get back on track?" That's compassion with accountability. It's not indulgent, it's effective. Here's a quirky twist from the animal kingdom: elephants have been observed comforting each other with physical gestures, touching trunks, vocalizing gently, after a distressing event. Researchers call it consolation behavior. The kicker? These comforting gestures are shown to reduce stress responses. Humans, too, self-soothe more effectively when they experience compassion after setbacks. Even imagined compassion helps. Your brain responds to it like it's real. So what would it mean to console yourself instead of criticize? It doesn't mean you abandon goals. It means you pursue them with your whole self in tow, including the parts that are tired, scared, or healing. A lot of the pressure we carry comes from this idea that if we don't push ourselves hard enough, we'll somehow fall apart. But what if pushing isn't the only path forward? What if holding yourself with care actually creates more sustainable momentum? This is where the metaphor shifts. You're not a soldier marching through a battlefield of self-improvement. You're a gardener tending to growth. Some days you water. Some days you prune. Some days you just let the soil breathe. It's all part of it. And yes, there will be moments when compassion feels like laziness. When resting feels like cheating. That's the old programming talking. The binary thinking that says, you're either grinding or giving up. But here's a gentle truth: your healing doesn't need to be loud to be real. Your progress doesn't have to be dramatic to matter. Choosing to treat yourself with softness, especially in moments where harshness feels familiar, that's radical. That's growth. And if you need a little mantra, try this one: I can be kind and still expect more from myself. You're allowed to have high standards and a soft heart. They're not mutually exclusive. In fact, they balance each other. So tonight, maybe you reflect not on what you failed to do, but on how you've been showing up. Have you kept trying? Have you learned something? Have you treated yourself with a little more patience than usual? That's growth. Quiet. Measured. Real. And that kind of growth prepares you for something even deeper, how compassion lives in your body, not just your mind. You can say all the right things to yourself. Whisper kind affirmations, light a candle, even write a love letter in your journal. But if your body's still curled in tension, your shoulders up to your ears, your breath shallow and clipped, something isn't landing. Because here's the thing, your nervous system doesn't lie. It remembers. It holds. It carries the weight of every judgment, every comparison, every moment you flinched inward instead of letting yourself be seen. And while your mind can intellectualize compassion, your body has to feel it to believe it. Let's start here. The experience of self-compassion isn't just a thought, it's a physiological event. When you criticize yourself, your brain activates your threat defense system, the same one that fires when you hear a loud noise or get chased by a dog. Cortisol floods in. Your heart races. Your muscles brace. It doesn't matter that you're not in actual danger. That voice in your head? It feels like danger. But when you offer yourself warmth, when you place a hand on your chest, take a slow breath, or even sigh audibly, you activate your care system instead. That's a different neural circuit. One tied to oxytocin, relaxation, and trust. Here's something unexpected. In studies where participants physically touched their heart while speaking to themselves with kindness, stress markers like heart rate and blood pressure actually dropped. No external validation needed. Just the body hearing its own gentleness. And not in theory, in real time. You might never have thought of self-compassion as a full-body practice. But it is. It's not just mental hygiene. It's somatic safety. An interesting divide still exists in the field of psychology. Some clinicians view self-compassion as primarily cognitive, a mindset shift, a change in language. Others see it as somatic, a physiological shift that must be felt in the muscles, the breath, the bones. The gap between these views is slowly narrowing, but the tension remains. What's clear, though, is that your body must be part of the conversation. And here's a little surprise from trauma therapy. The body can accept compassion even when the mind resists it. Clients who couldn't say, "I'm okay," in words were able to experience relief simply by softening their breath or loosening their hands. The body knows what safety feels like. Sometimes long before the mind catches up. This is especially true if you've lived through any form of emotional trauma. If you've learned that mistakes mean punishment. That rest means laziness. That softness is dangerous. In those cases, your body might resist compassion at first. It's not being difficult, it's being protective. That's why embodiment matters. That's why your nervous system needs a seat at the table. Just a quirky detail. In one animal study, researchers found that rats who were gently stroked during infancy responded more calmly to stress later in life. Not because they learned to think differently, but because their bodies had learned to associate touch with safety. And while we're not rats, hopefully, the mechanism is surprisingly similar. So what does this mean for you? It means that healing isn't only about reframing your thoughts, it's about retraining your felt experience. It means using your senses, your breath, your physical presence as part of your self-compassion toolkit. Here are a few small, powerful ways to do that. The hand-on-heart gesture. Place your palm gently on your chest and breathe. This activates the vagus nerve, signaling calm to your entire system. Gentle rocking. Subtle, rhythmic movement soothes the inner child, literally. It mimics early sensations of comfort. Warmth. Wrapping yourself in a blanket, holding a cup of tea, or even taking a warm shower can help ground you in care. Breath anchoring. Inhale for 4, exhale for 6. The extended exhale slows the heart and tells the body it's safe. You don't need fancy rituals. You just need small, consistent signals of safety. Because even if your thoughts are spiraling, your body can learn a new story. And that's the beauty of this work, it's forgiving. You don't have to get it perfect. You don't even have to believe in it 100% yet. You just have to try something small. A breath. A pause. A tender touch. There's a quiet rebellion in saying, my body deserves to feel safe with me. Let that land. Because your body has been through enough. It's held the weight of your striving, your stress, your judgment. It has flinched under pressure and stiffened under shame. Tonight, maybe it gets to relax. And even if the mind doesn't totally understand, even if your inner critic tries to speak up again, you can still drop into breath, into warmth, into stillness. That's how you begin to rewire the story. You stop trying to think your way into compassion, and instead, you feel your way into it. And that embodied peace leads us into another place where care becomes critical. When you're so worn out from giving to others, you barely remember how to give to yourself. There's a specific kind of tired that doesn't go away with sleep. A heaviness that clings even after you've crossed everything off the list, smiled at everyone who needed you, and held space like a seasoned therapist for other people's pain. It's the quiet ache of empathy overload. When you care deeply, and you do, maybe too much, you eventually hit a point where your emotional reserves run low. You're stretched thin, but still reaching. Still trying to show up, be kind, be supportive. But inside, you're worn out. This is what researchers call compassion fatigue. And no, it's not just for nurses, therapists, or caregivers. If you're the strong one, the emotional support friend, the steady shoulder in your circle, you know exactly what it feels like to give and give until you're running on fumes. But here's the twist, compassion fatigue doesn't mean you've stopped caring. It means you've cared without replenishment. You've extended warmth outward without looping it back inward. An odd but true fact, studies show that people with high levels of empathy are more prone to burnout unless they also practice self-compassion. That's the buffer. That's the hinge. Without it, empathy becomes a slow leak in your system. With it, it becomes sustainable. And here's a fresh angle worth noting. Some scholars now argue that empathy without boundaries is incomplete. That it's not heroic to absorb others' emotions until you're emotionally flattened, it's unbalanced. The evolving view in psychology is that compassion must include yourself, or it turns into self-neglect in disguise. This raises a key point. Self-compassion doesn't cancel your compassion for others, it strengthens it. Because when you're depleted, your capacity to connect doesn't just shrink, it curdles. You start to resent the people you're trying to help. You ghost messages. You flinch when someone says, "Can I vent for a sec?" And then, of course, your inner critic shows up to say, "Wow, what happened to you? You used to be so supportive." It's a vicious cycle. But it's not your fault. You were taught to be a giver. You probably pride yourself on being there for others. That's not bad. But it needs balance. You need to exist in the equation. Here's a quirky detail from animal behavior research. Even chimpanzees show signs of social exhaustion. After long periods of group tension, certain apes isolate themselves temporarily to recover. They instinctively know when it's too much. You, a highly evolved human being, should be allowed the same. So how do you start giving yourself the care you so generously offer to others? You start by noticing the signs of emotional depletion. Snapping at minor things. Avoiding connection you usually enjoy. Feeling guilty for not doing enough. Wanting to disappear for just a day, or a month. Numbness instead of empathy. These aren't flaws. These are signals. Red flags waving quietly in your nervous system, saying, you need tending, too. The debate is still active in therapeutic circles about how much self-care is enough to balance caregiving. Some therapists advocate for strict emotional boundaries and downtime, others believe it's more about internal pacing, small, continuous acts of self-attunement that prevent the tank from ever running completely dry. What's clear is this: recovery doesn't always mean escape. You don't have to book a week-long retreat to feel human again. Sometimes, you just need 5 minutes where no one needs anything from you. 5 minutes where you get to ask yourself, what do I feel right now, and actually listen. Here's one soft suggestion. try what's called a self-compassion break. It's simple. You pause and tell yourself 3 things. This is a moment of suffering. Suffering is a part of life. May I be kind to myself in this moment? It sounds small. But those 3 sentences disrupt the cycle. They shift you from overgiving autopilot into gentle awareness. And that awareness becomes your breath. Your boundary. Your pause. Because guess what? You don't owe everyone access to your heart all the time. You're allowed to close the door, draw the curtains, and say, not tonight. Not because you don't care, but because you care enough to preserve what's left of your light. Even therapists, even doctors, even monks on mountaintops, they all need to recharge. So do you. Another little surprise, in Scandinavian cultures, there's a word, lagom, which roughly means, not too much, not too little, just enough. It's not about perfection or excess. It's about balance. Self-compassion is lagom for your emotional energy. Just enough care for you, too. Tonight, maybe you reflect on this. Who have you been caring for lately? Who's been leaning on your emotional generosity? And more importantly, when was the last time you leaned on yourself? On your own tenderness? On your own patience? Because you can't keep pouring from a cracked cup. So maybe you patch the cracks, slowly, kindly. Not by walking away from everyone, but by including yourself in the circle of your care. Let that land. Let it settle in your chest. You are worth the effort of your own compassion. And with that soft restoration, we begin to transform how we even interpret comparison itself. You already know comparison is exhausting. That much is clear. But what if it wasn't always the enemy? What if, on your better days, comparison could be a clue, not a curse? That twinge of envy? That awkward scroll-stopping moment where someone else's life makes yours feel a little less shiny? It stings, yes, but it also points. It highlights something you care about. Something maybe you've been neglecting. Something important enough to hurt a little. Let's take a breath and flip the script. Comparison doesn't always have to mean, I'm not enough. Sometimes it means, this matters to me. You scroll past a post about someone running a half marathon, and it bugs you more than you expect. Not because you secretly hate them, but because you miss feeling strong. You miss moving your body. You remember what confidence felt like, and you want it again. That moment of discomfort? It's not just insecurity. It's information. In psychology, this is called upward social comparison, and while it often brings self-doubt, it can also fuel growth. Researchers have found that when people compare themselves to someone slightly ahead of them, someone relatable, they're more likely to feel inspired than discouraged. The key is how you interpret the gap between you and them. Here's something fresh to consider. Some therapists suggest journaling your envy. Not to dwell in it, but to decode it. Ask, what does this reveal about what I long for? Or, what might this person's life reflect that I've been denying myself? This technique, called emotional mapping, turns envy into insight. It transforms that sick little knot in your stomach into a breadcrumb. A direction. Of course, not all comparison is helpful. We've all spiraled after seeing someone who seems to have everything figured out: success, style, spiritual alignment, and somehow, a golden retriever named Winston. The kind of comparison that makes you feel frozen? That's not inspiration. That's overload. A quiet debate continues in motivational psychology. Is comparison a necessary driver for growth, or a maladaptive byproduct of social hierarchies? Some argue we need it to measure progress. Others say it corrodes self-worth and undermines connection. But one growing perspective says the answer isn't in removing comparison, it's in relating to it differently. A quirky little twist from ancient philosophy, the Stoics believed that envy arises when you compare values rather than outcomes. In other words, you feel bad not because someone has more, but because you value what they have, and it reminds you of where you're out of alignment. So instead of, I'm behind, try asking, am I living in sync with what matters to me? That's not a rhetorical shift. That's an emotional one. It opens a conversation with yourself that's curious, not critical. Let's make it tangible. Say you're envious of someone's career path. Instead of shaming yourself, pause and ask, do I miss feeling purposeful? Am I craving structure or freedom? Have I settled somewhere that no longer fits? Now you're not just drowning in, I'm not good enough. You're navigating. You're listening to what comparison is trying to say beneath the noise. And sometimes, it's not even about the other person. Sometimes the envy is a disguise for grief. For regret. For the version of yourself you thought you'd be by now. That's tender stuff. Be gentle with it. Another little surprise. Neuroscientists have observed that the brain's pain centers light up during social comparison. But, here's the twist, reflective reframing significantly reduces that pain response. So yes, how you frame the moment actually changes how deeply it lands. Try it. Next time you catch yourself spiraling into, why not me? Pause. Reframe. Maybe that's something I want to explore. Or even, good for them. What does that stir in me? It sounds small, but it's a neurological redirect. Because here's the truth, comparison isn't just about others. It's about desire. And desire, when it's honest, is a compass. You want more connection? More creativity? More ease? Great. Let the envy show you where to begin, not what to regret. Let's go even softer. If someone's life lights something up in you, you don't have to copy them. You don't even have to chase the same thing. But you can let their story remind you that more is possible. That there are parts of you still yearning to stretch. To bloom. That's the real shift, from self-punishment to self-inquiry. And sometimes the answer to comparison isn't doing more, it's redefining what success means to you in this season. You don't have to crave what everyone else craves. You don't have to hustle for a dream that doesn't actually belong to you. You just have to stay curious. To stay soft. To notice where your gaze goes, and ask what it's trying to tell you. So tonight, as you lay in the hush of your own quiet breath, maybe you revisit the moments today that sparked envy. Not with judgment. With kindness. With the soft, steady question, what is this revealing about me? Because sometimes, the feeling you want to swat away is the one pointing you home. And that kind of clarity, raw, reflective, real, can lead you somewhere even more freeing, the decision to stop racing someone else's clock entirely. There's a subtle panic that lives under most of our timelines. A quiet, nagging fear that you're too late. Too far behind. That everyone else got the manual to life's milestones and you're just winging it. Blindfolded. With one shoe. You know the ones, get your degree by 22, land the job by 25, find your soulmate before 30, have the dream house and a golden retriever before 35, and ideally, look unbothered and glowing throughout. Like a protagonist in a Netflix original. Except your timeline didn't unfold that way. Maybe you took detours. Maybe life fell apart and rearranged itself. Maybe you're still figuring things out, and the pressure to catch up has become its own kind of grief. Let's breathe into this one slowly. Your timeline is not broken. Here's a fresh reframe. Life is not a conveyor belt. It's a garden. And not everything blooms at the same pace. Some seeds take longer. Some flowers don't appear until their second season. Or third. Or 10th. That doesn't make them any less beautiful, it makes them exactly right for their rhythm. In developmental psychology, there's growing evidence that the concept of social clocks, unspoken cultural timelines, has a significant effect on perceived self-worth. When you believe you're off schedule, it increases stress, self-doubt, and even depression. Not because your life is objectively wrong, but because your brain interprets deviation from the norm as failure. Yet researchers also found that people who reject rigid timelines and define success by personal meaning rather than age-based expectations report higher life satisfaction. They sleep better. They self-soothe more easily. They carry less shame. Something odd but comforting. In a longitudinal study of life satisfaction, people in their 40s and 50s reported greater happiness when they felt in control of their pace, regardless of their achievements. They didn't necessarily have more, they just stopped racing everyone else. The pressure to arrive by a certain age? It's marketing. It's myth. It's a mashup of outdated traditions, curated digital milestones, and the idea that life unfolds in neat, photogenic chapters. Spoiler, it doesn't. And here's a quirky historical detail you probably haven't heard. Back in the 1800s, being married before 30 was often seen as risky, especially for women. Too early, they said, and you wouldn't have had time to mature emotionally. Oh, how the pendulum swings. There is still active debate in psychology about whether certain life stages have ideal timing, especially around career, parenting, and independence. Some experts suggest early adulthood is critical for establishing identity and success. Others argue that lifelong development means any stage can be a fresh start. The tension comes down to this: are you chasing a timeline, or building a life? Here's the softer truth: it's okay to outgrow old deadlines. Maybe you thought you'd be farther along by now. Okay. Acknowledge that. Mourn that. Then ask, what version of fulfillment am I allowed to create now? Because the magic happens not when you arrive on time, but when you stop treating your life like a delayed train. You're not behind. You're just on your own path. And paths wind. A gentle practice for those days when the timeline noise gets loud: zoom out. Literally. Look at a calendar of your entire year. Now highlight the days you showed up for yourself. The ones where you chose rest, or growth, or connection. Not the ones where you performed well or hit milestones, the quiet ones. The real ones. You'll probably notice something: your progress isn't linear. It's textured. It's scattered. It's alive. Just like you. Another fun little twist: in Eastern philosophies, the idea of late blooming is not only accepted, it's revered. In Japanese culture, the cherry blossom blooms briefly and beautifully, but the chrysanthemum blooms in autumn, long after others have faded. And it's considered the symbol of enduring strength. You don't need to rush your blossom. You don't need to post a timeline update for your inner healing. You're allowed to do things out of order. To start over. To pause. To pivot. To take 3 steps sideways and call that forward. And when the voice inside says, you should have figured this out by now, you're allowed to respond, maybe. But here I am. Figuring it out anyway. Tonight, maybe you soften the grip on the invisible stopwatch. Maybe you stop scrolling long enough to feel your own heartbeat. Your own season. Your own unfolding. Because sometimes peace comes not from catching up, but from stepping out of the race entirely. That kind of presence, unhurried, unworried, creates space for something small and sacred, the rituals that remind you who you are, with or without anyone watching. Some days, self-worth feels like an abstract idea, something you understand in theory but can't quite feel in your bones. That's when rituals come in. Not grand, ceremonial acts. Not spiritual performances. Just the small, repeated gestures that remind you, quietly but consistently, you matter. The world teaches you to perform. To seek validation. To base your value on achievement, appearance, or output. But rituals? They don't need applause. They don't care who's watching. They're just for you. These practices become tiny anchors, touchstones in a sea of comparison and pressure. And when repeated with intention, they begin to rewrite your internal narrative. Not with loud declarations, but with quiet consistency. Psychologists have long studied the power of ritual, especially in grounding identity and reducing anxiety. Even simple routines, like lighting a candle before journaling or drinking your morning coffee without distraction, can reduce cortisol levels and increase emotional stability. Not because the act itself is magical, but because your nervous system recognizes the pattern and responds with safety. And while mainstream self-care often gets commercialized, we see you, $80 rose quartz rollers, real self-compassion rituals don't require luxury. they require presence. Take, for example, the ritual of washing your face at night. Sounds mundane, right? But if done slowly, warm water, gentle pressure, no rushing, it becomes an act of care. A way of saying, even if today was hard, I'm still worthy of softness. One interesting tidbit, in studies on ritual behavior, researchers found that repeated gestures, even when symbolic, can significantly increase a person's sense of control during uncertain times. It's not about superstition, it's about soothing chaos with rhythm. A growing debate in psychological circles questions whether ritual is more psychological or cultural in nature. Some believe rituals matter because we believe they matter, a placebo of meaning. Others argue rituals work precisely because they offer physical structure, which the brain craves during stress. Either way, the impact is real. So what kind of rituals anchor your worth? It doesn't have to be elaborate. Maybe it's a 5-minute check-in each morning. Maybe it's whispering a phrase to yourself when anxiety hits, "This feeling will pass, and I'll still be here." Maybe it's putting on your favorite socks before a hard conversation. Or taking a walk at the same time every evening, phone off, head clear. These acts may look small from the outside, but they're declarations. They're how you show yourself, over and over, "I will not abandon you." Let's be honest, it's easy to forget your worth when life feels like a mess. When your inbox is overflowing, your social battery is dead, and your to-do list is breathing in the dark. That's exactly when rituals matter most. Not to fix you, to hold you. And a quirky cultural note, in Korean wellness philosophy, there's a tradition called soup, a practice of forest bathing, where you walk through trees with no agenda but to be. No hiking. No sweating. Just existing in nature's rhythm. That, too, is a ritual. One where nothing needs to happen to be meaningful. You don't have to move to the woods to create this kind of rhythm in your own life. It might be as simple as keeping a reminder note on your nightstand, "Rest is part of the process." Or sitting down each Sunday to light a candle and ask, "What do I want to bring into this week?" These rituals don't erase your struggles. They accompany them. Like a friend who doesn't fix anything but still sits beside you, holding your hand. Over time, these practices start to form a pattern, a quiet infrastructure beneath your chaos. They don't stop the storms, but they remind you that you have shelter. That you're showing up for yourself, again and again, even when the world feels like too much. And maybe that's the most radical part of all. Not that you never fall apart, but that when you do, you have something to return to. A rhythm. A routine. A ritual. It doesn't have to be pretty. You can cry while doing it. You can do it imperfectly. The point isn't perfection, it's presence. Some days, that presence is the only thing that keeps you from unraveling. That morning stretch. That deep breath before opening your inbox. That moment of stillness before bed. These aren't luxuries. They're lifelines. So tonight, maybe you pick one. Just one. A new ritual. A mini one. Light a candle. Hold your own hand. Lay your phone on the floor and breathe for 10 seconds. Not to change everything. Just to mark the moment, I was here. I cared enough to pause. That pause becomes your proof. Your quiet contract with yourself. And as you show up in those small ways, day after day, the need to prove your worth fades. Because you're no longer waiting for external permission. You're building your own foundation. From that foundation, something even more important starts to grow, not a perfect life, but the willingness to live honestly inside a messy one. There's this unspoken promise we're all quietly waiting on, that one day, everything will finally make sense. You'll wake up with clarity, your habits will align, your inner critic will retire, and your morning routine will magically include gratitude journaling, green smoothies, and zero anxiety. Cue the string music. But let's be honest, life rarely clicks into place like that. If anything, it unfolds more like a kitchen drawer full of tangled chargers and mystery receipts. A little cluttered. A little inconsistent. always needing some kind of gentle reorganization. And here's the truth you might be tiptoeing around. What if it never gets fully tidy? What if healing is always a bit messy? Not broken. Not hopeless. Just textured. Ongoing. Human. There's something freeing about dropping the fantasy of total resolution. That magical, aha moment when everything aligns perfectly and you finally become your most actualized self. It's overrated. What actually brings peace is learning to live inside the process, even when the process is foggy, frustrating, or frankly, boring. In psychology, there's a concept called emotional granularity, your ability to recognize and describe the subtle shades of your emotional experience. People with high emotional granularity tend to be more resilient because they don't force clarity where there is none. They can say, "I feel off today," instead of demanding a solution. They allow complexity. And that allowance is a form of compassion in itself. You might not know this, but people who expect their healing to be fast and linear often experience more distress than those who approach it as cyclical. It's called the progress paradox. The more you expect neat growth, the more shame you feel when you inevitably hit a setback. But if you anticipate messiness, you're actually more likely to keep going. Here's a quirky psychological twist. In some forms of narrative therapy, clients are encouraged to describe their life not as a path, but as a story arc with recurring themes. You don't need to solve everything, you just need to return to the central thread, your capacity to care for yourself when things wobble. So if you've been waiting for that clean, Instagram-worthy version of healing, maybe stop waiting. Maybe real healing looks more like canceling plans and ordering soup. Like missing 3 days of journaling and then returning with, "Hey, still here." Like trying a meditation, hating it, and laughing instead. A strange but true detail, Buddhist teachings often refer to the mind as a monkey in a house of mirrors, constantly jumping, seeing distorted reflections, reacting to its own reactions. The goal isn't to silence the monkey. It's to stop freaking out every time it makes noise. You're allowed to be inconsistent. You're allowed to grow unevenly. You're allowed to wake up one day feeling hopeful and the next like you've regressed 10 years. That's not failure. That's life with a pulse. The idea that one day you'll be totally healed, totally unbothered, totally chill? It's seductive. But also kind of a trap. Because when things inevitably get hard again, you think, "Oh no, I lost it." But what if you didn't lose anything? What if healing includes revisiting old feelings with new tools? A fresh angle in trauma psychology explores this exact phenomenon. It's not about never getting triggered again, it's about shortening the distance between reaction and regulation. That's the real growth. Not perfection, but recovery time. So maybe tonight, you acknowledge that some parts of your healing won't be elegant. Some days, you'll regress. Snap. Avoid. Procrastinate. Compare. And maybe, instead of spiraling, you whisper, "Ah, this part again." That's how you hold yourself. Not by eliminating the mess, but by responding to it with less panic. And when you do that enough times, something subtle shifts. The mess doesn't own you anymore. It's just part of the scene. You become the calm within the clutter. The steady hand holding the frayed thread. You don't have to finish the puzzle to feel proud of the piece you placed today. A growing school of thought in positive psychology is now centered around resilience through imperfection. The idea that strength isn't in avoiding breakdowns but in becoming gentler and more adaptive each time they happen. That the goal isn't to be untouchable, it's to be responsive. You don't become your best self by erasing your worst moments. You become your best self by loving who you are inside those moments. Especially when the world feels blurry. Especially when the future feels uncertain. So tonight, maybe you let go of the fantasy that everything will one day be tidy, aligned, and wrapped in clarity. Maybe instead, you light a candle for the version of you who's still trying. Still asking questions. Still walking through the fog with your own hand in yours. That hand-holding? That's the revolution. And speaking of revolutions, not the loud, chaotic kind, but the quiet ones that happen in the background of your daily life. that's exactly where we're headed next. Self-compassion isn't flashy. It doesn't shout from rooftops. It doesn't trend, go viral, or look particularly impressive in a highlight reel. In fact, if you were to film it, it might just look like someone sitting quietly on their couch, exhaling after a long day. Or standing in the mirror, touching their heart instead of critiquing their face. Or putting the phone down mid-scroll and whispering, "Enough for tonight." This is what makes it radical. Because in a world built on proving, perfecting, and performing, choosing gentleness, without conditions, is a quiet revolution. And it changes everything. Not all at once, of course. There's no fireworks moment when you suddenly become a self-compassion ninja. It happens slowly. Over time. In micro-decisions. In how you talk to yourself when no one else is listening. In whether you give yourself a pass or a punishment when things go sideways. You might not even realize it's happening until one day, you face a disappointment, and instead of spiraling into shame, you just pause. Breathe. Move forward. Softly. Without turning it into a character flaw. That's the shift. You start to recognize that the voice you use on yourself matters just as much as anything you accomplish. You realize that growth rooted in cruelty is fragile, but growth rooted in compassion is unshakable. Let's pause for a moment and really feel that. You don't need to conquer yourself to improve. You don't need to crush your weaknesses to become strong. You don't need to hustle your way into healing. In fact, some of the most profound shifts you'll ever experience will come not through intensity, but through tenderness. Through choosing to meet yourself with understanding, especially when you don't deserve it. That's the revolution. That's the thing no algorithm can package and sell. An interesting thread emerging in mindfulness-based therapy supports this. When people practice loving-kindness meditation or other compassion practices regularly, their brains show increased activation in regions tied to connection, not performance. What changes isn't just self-image, it's how people relate to themselves in their everyday moments. And what's even wilder? This doesn't make people less ambitious. Quite the opposite. Studies show that self-compassionate people are more likely to take risks, try again after failure, and pursue values-aligned goals. Because they're not afraid of falling apart along the way. They know they have a soft place to land. There's some disagreement among researchers about whether this is due to reduced fear of failure, increased emotional regulation, or improved self-concept. But honestly, it probably doesn't matter. What matters is, it works. A weird but beautiful bonus. In Tibetan traditions, there's a term, shenpa, which refers to the subtle hook of self-rejection. That tiny moment you contract. Flinch. Tense up in reaction to your own experience. The moment you criticize yourself before anyone else can. Compassion, they say, is how you unhook from that spiral. Not by fixing yourself, but by staying with yourself. So maybe your revolution doesn't look like a total life overhaul. Maybe it looks like this. Logging off when you feel overstimulated. Eating a warm meal and actually tasting it. Saying no even when you're afraid of disappointing someone. Sleeping without guilt. Forgiving yourself for being human, again. These aren't lazy. These are liberating. You don't owe the world a polished, flawless version of yourself to earn rest, or respect, or softness. You're already worthy. That's not a motivational quote. That's the truth your nervous system has been waiting to hear. And the more you live like it's true, the less you need constant validation. The less you chase timelines. The less you grip outcomes. You start to feel a little more free. A little more real. A little more you. So tonight, as the world quiets and the demands fade, maybe you return to yourself. Gently. Without needing to fix anything. Without needing to level up. Just you, breathing. And maybe that's enough. In fact, it's more than enough. Now, slow everything down. No more pushing. No more reflecting. Just let the edges blur. Your breath softens, long and low. Your jaw unclenches, just slightly. Your arms rest heavier against the bed or the couch or the floor, wherever you've chosen to be still. There's no need to figure anything out right now. No need to replay the day or plan tomorrow. All of that can wait. Right now, you're safe. You're home. You're allowed to let go. Think of all the moments you've held tension today without realizing it. In your thoughts. In your body. In the way you spoke to yourself. And now, it's okay to release that. Let the moment be as it is. Nothing more. You're doing enough. You are enough. Let that truth drift into your breath. Let it settle somewhere in your chest. A warm hum. A gentle knowing. The revolution of self-compassion doesn't need applause. It's not loud or proud. It's quiet. And patient. And powerful. And you've begun it, just by being here. Just by listening. Just by staying with yourself, even for a few soft minutes longer than usual. Let your eyes rest. Let your thoughts slow. Let your whole being exhale. You don't have to earn this rest. It's already yours. So take it. Let's slowly drift into tonight's quiet moments together.